Hello, everybody. It's Starrapter here. Welcome to the Outer Rim transmission number 2. This is a new video series that I've been doing where I bring on guests, my friends from the Star Wars community, to chat about a certain topic that they have a certain interest in. And today I'm bringing on none other than Dominic Jones from the Star Wars Underworld and from the Clone Wars Strikes Back podcast. How you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you got it. You got it. Well, like I said, the Clone Wars Strikes Back. We are talking about the Clone Wars legacy. Just because of season 7 with the Clone Wars coming to an end, everybody's very sad after 7 seasons of this awesome show. And just tell us a little bit about the podcast that you've been part of for a while now.
Sure. So the Clone Wars Strikes Back is a spinoff from my other show, which is the Star Wars Underworld podcast, which is just a sort of a weekly news discussion show where we just break down whatever's going on in Star Wars, like if there's casting news or announcements about TV shows and movies. And of course, we review the movies and on that show. But the Clone Wars Strikes Back kind of spun off from that. And it started all the way back in 2013 when the Clone Wars went off the air for the first time. Because Clone Wars has gone off the air 3 times now. Went off in 2013, went off in 2014 with the Netflix season, and then now again in 2020. And it was started by myself and my friend Kieran Duggan. And Kieran actually had the idea. He's like, what if, to pass the time before The Force Awakens, we rewatched the Clone Wars and did a podcast about it. And I said, that's a genius idea. Let's do it. And so we started and we watched through the series once. It took us until just about right after The Force Awakens came out. That was sort of when we got to kind of the end of our initial run. And so that was sort of early 2016. And then we did a few more episodes and the show kind of fizzled off into the background. And then, of course, 2018, they announced, hey, guess what? The show is coming back. Clone Wars is back. Clone Wars saved. And I was actually there at Comic-Con when they announced it. And I remember thinking, like, I gotta call Kieran right away. We got to get that show going again. We gotta make this happen. And so we started doing a few more episodes of that leading up to season 7. And then through season 7, we just had the most fun ever doing an episode for each episode of that season, doing a podcast that is, and bringing on guests. We had you on for an episode. We had lots of other fun people on. And we had some of my favorite Star Wars discussions that I've ever had were on this season of the Clone Wars Strikes Back, just breaking it all down, because these episodes, they were all really good. Like even the weakest episode of this season was still a pretty solid episode. It was hard to complain about any of them. And they all delved into really interesting aspects of the Star Wars galaxy and made for some fantastic discussions. And that episode that you were on, we got into some like serious, like morality of war type discussions because we were getting into like, did the clones do the right thing? Did the Jedi do the right thing? What happens here? Did they abandon the species of aliens that they kind of dragged into the war? It was really interesting stuff, and it's just shows again how great this show was, because it could the Clone Wars, that is, because it could bring out such interesting conversations about the Star Wars galaxy while also just being really entertaining. Like this whole season 7 was just so much fun to watch. It kind of flew by because all the episodes again were so good. Clone Wars, like any show, had its few stinkers here and there. Any show that's on for 7 seasons has a few episodes that aren't so great. But season 7 was like they did everything right there, just about.
Yeah, no, definitely. They had a little bit of everything. It was kind of like greatest hits, right? Like it opens up with, of course, an awesome clone arc with the Bad Batch, and it has Anakin and stuff with Rex getting to his head. Then we have, like a slower type of arc that was all about Ahsoka. Then it just comes together in an incredible climax. But yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree. That was such a fun episode. I think it was on the Was it On the Wings of Kiridax? I think the episode I might
Yeah.
have been on. Yeah, it just goes to show you again, like how much discussion an animated show on surface that is for kids, right? Everybody's like, oh, this show is for kids, and it's like, oh, is it really though? Because come on, we're coming up with the Techno Union discussions about the Jedi doing this. Are they right doing it? Like that, you're right. That is so fun when you could really get into the nitty gritty and just break it down like
Yeah.
that.
Clone Wars has always been interesting because people always said it was such a kiddie show and it was for kids. And I know if you look at season 1 and the Clone Wars movie, why you get that impression, because there was some stuff in there, Stinky the Hut being one of those instances. Everybody loves Baby Yoda, but nobody liked Baby Jabba. There were a few things like that made people think things were a little bit kiddie, but I mean, season 2 we had a suicide bombing. Like it
Ooh,
was
yeah.
really they started going into deep, dark, intense places fast, and there were heads being chopped off left and right. Some stuff that even got censored from Cartoon Network and that only showed up on the DVDs and the Blu-rays. But I think is actually on Disney Plus now.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's a real kiddie show here. But that was Clone Wars, right? That was what made it so great. Is it could be really kiddie 1 second and then really dark and really adult the next.
That's kind of where I want to start the discussion, is just getting right into it, right? Like the legacy of the Clone Wars, like what kind of a lasting impact does this 7 season animated series have? And right off the bat, like we're talking about now, it's just like this it subverts all expectations, right? When you're talking about, oh, a show that airs on Cartoon Network and it's on Saturday mornings, like how it's got to be a pretty innocent show, right? Not really, when people are getting beheaded and this and that. It just completely at surface level looks like it, but it's just so much more than that. The show brings out so much more than just the pretty visuals, for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of what Star Wars has always done in a way, right? Because in you look at the original film, and so much of it is just this funny, silly romp with 3PO and R2, these like tin can robots that are arguing with each other, and then there's a guy flying around in his hamburger spaceship with his giant dog co-pilot, and everybody's snapping at each other with really fun lines. And then at the same time in that same movie, they blow up an entire planet and they show the corpse of Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru after they've been burned alive. So it's kind of continuing this sort of weird Star Wars legacy of at 1 second just being this crazy fun kid-friendly romp, and then at the next second it's like, oh no, we're going to show you some real dark stuff.
Yeah, it seriously does get that whole vibe, and it really, when it comes down to it, it feels like Star Wars, right? Like, yeah, there's certain episodes in here, of course, not everything's perfect. They don't really feel a lot like Star Wars, but I can safely say that majority of the episodes, they feel like Star Wars. I mean, the most recent season comes to mind, with the
Absolutely.
awesome setup with Anakin, and they're on the bridge, the final the final season, the arc, and
Mhm.
they start with the Return of the Jedi kind of fanfare with Jabba's sail barge, and I was like, oh, this literally feels like the DNA of Star Wars right now.
Yeah, that opening scene for the Siege of Mandalore, like that was when you could tell that even in the season where they had turned things up a notch, they were turning the finale up 4 or 5 or 10 notches, because it was just it felt different. Like the first 8 episodes of season 7 were based on stuff that they had started to work on when the show got canceled. They had shown us bits and pieces, and in some cases, entire episodes that were unfinished from those storylines. And so really when we saw them finalized for season 7, they were, things that had been sort of dusted off the shelf and finished up properly and given a once over to make sure that they fit in properly today. Whereas Siege of Mandalore was its own creation from the beginning, and you can tell it's paced differently. There's no real thought to commercial breaks or even really episode breaks. Like there's a few places where the episode breaks, you understand why they chose to put them there, but you can watch that thing, I think, back to back without the openings and have it play perfectly as a movie, which I'm not sure you can do with all arcs. You can do it with some of them, but some generally you need the little narration in between to kind of patch things over. But this one feels like it's just a movie, and is written like a movie. It's paced like a movie. It has moments that feel like they are designed for that communal theater experience. When we talked about that first episode, I talked about Obi-Wan's entrance on that bridge scene, and I've called it an applause break moment
Yeah.
because it was like that. It was like a moment, it to Avengers Infinity War when Captain America makes his entrance and the music swells and he steps out of the shadow and he kind of holds there. And it's like, what is he just standing there for? But then you realize, oh no, everybody should be standing and applauding right now. And if you were there on opening night, right, like that's what people were doing. My experience seeing Avengers Infinity War in the theater was a lot of fun because the theater was fun and everybody was cheering and clapping like when that happened. And as I was sitting there in my basement watching that first episode for the first time and Obi-Wan entered, I just started clapping by myself. I'm like, you know what? Well done. Well done, Clone Wars. I just sort of thought, like, I know this is a TV show. It was always going to be seen this way. But I thought, like, man, I wish they could have done premiere screenings for this in theaters or at Celebration or something, just so that we could all watch these moments together and, do those applause breaks because it was worthwhile. And I still hope that we can have a screening of it somewhere, like at a Celebration or a Comic-Con or something. Something just so the fans can do that, but when you do that on the second or third screening, it's not the same as that
it's
first
not the same
time when you're. Yeah, it's not the same as that first time when you're like, yeah, Obi-Wan in the house.
Man. Yes, it literally turns into like an event, right? Like you're like,
yeah.
Oh yes, this is the moment we've been waiting for. Here we go. He's gonna wreck the droids. Let's go.
Yeah, and it can take a movie that even you don't necessarily love, and like if everybody else is having fun, you're just like, I'm in. I'm having fun too. But then Clone Wars, right, was so good that you wouldn't even need that aspect of it. But that communal experience, it's what makes live sports so much fun. And I love that people have brought that over to movies, even though it doesn't make sense, right? The directors and the actors aren't in the theater. They can't hear you applaud. It's not like when you're at a baseball game and a guy hits a home run and you're like applaud. I mean, he's like, yes, thank you. Tip of the cap, all that stuff. It doesn't really make sense, but it just makes the experience more fun.
Yeah, for sure. Now, getting into one of the things that makes Star Wars Star Wars is the fact that they always kind of break new ground with visuals. And I think the Clone Wars, I mean, you look at season 1 or actually the movie and then you compare it to where it's at now with the end of the series and literally people are saying that some of those scenes look like they're live action. So to me it's like the fidelity and the amount of lighting, the lighting effects and everything, the cinematic quality in general, just the way the whole thing is shot. It's like, I mean, granted, I don't watch a lot of animation, but I can't understand if there's anything out there that's quite as good as these last couple episodes we've gotten because they just blew me away.
Yes, same. I don't watch a ton of animation, but I have to think, at least on television, there's nothing quite like this. And I think you look at the follow-up Star Wars shows, Star Wars Rebels and Star Wars Resistance, both of which I quite enjoyed. But you could tell they weren't quite at the same visual level as the Clone Wars. And I think one of the real sort of tragedies of the Clone Wars is that when you hear the Clone Wars movie, you think, oh, this is going to be their best effort. When, it was at the time, like that was the best they could do at the time. But it's really like that is the low level. It's the baseline for what the show became and everything that came since then. Even stuff from season 3 on, I think the show just went to the next level in terms of animation visually, or animation sort of achievements. And you look at what they accomplished in this last season, especially with the Siege of Mandalore. That should be what we think of when we think of the Clone Wars movie, because
Yes.
that is something, I do believe that is something that is on par with just about anything animated that's in the theaters right now.
Yeah, definitely to me like set the gold standard. I mean, you compare to things like I don't know, like The Incredibles 2 or something from Pixar. Like it
Yeah.
is literally like Pixar level. And those guys do such a fantastic job on those films. To see everything come full circle with the Clone Wars, it's so nice. And you're seeing this animation, you're like, what's next? What's next? Like the Clone Wars set the bar, and hopefully whatever they come out with next is at least at that quality, if not higher. Hopefully, maybe.
I hope so, right? Like Sam Witwer, who plays Darth Maul on the show, he tweeted out this link to the ratings, for lack of a better term, for
Yeah.
streaming shows. And for the weeks that it was on, especially during its finale, Clone Wars blew everything else out of the water. Like it wasn't even close.
Yeah.
And you can't say, well, nobody's watching TV right now because, it's not a whole lot else to do right now. So there was a lot of attention on this, and I think people saw how good and how great this show could be. And I do believe that Clone Wars got more popular after it went off the air, the first time, which is strange, but it's not unheard of either. And so it got bigger and bigger. And so when it came back, there was this huge groundswell of like excitement, and that only built leading up to the finale. And the finale did something that not a lot of finales do, which is actually live up to and in some cases exceed the expectations that people had for it. And there was so much positive buzz around this season. I can't think of really one negative story, one major negative story. I know there were a couple of people that weren't super thrilled with like the first episode
Hmm.
of the second arc, but the second, third, fourth, and fourth episodes of that arc, I think, picked up and more than made up for it. And really, if your biggest complaint is that one of the episodes out of 12 is kind of a B minus or a C plus, like that's really good. That's one, and it's the worst, and it's still pretty good. That's all right. And there wasn't any big controversies that came out, be it about continuity or anything else that sometimes plagued the show during its earlier run. There wasn't any big disappointment about the show not living up to expectations, like I said, and just people were excited and happy to have it back, and it delivered on what people were looking for. And so I think I hope that the Disney and everybody at Lucasfilm looked at this and looked at the response to it, both on the numbers side and just sort of the like what people are saying side of things. And they're like, all right, maybe we won't do season 8 of Clone Wars necessarily because we've given it the best possible ending.
Hmm.
But let's do something else of this quality. Let's get these same storytellers back in. Let's give Dave Filoni, so that same writer's room, or the ability to pick that same writer's room that he liked, and let's let them come up with the stories they want to tell, and tell them the same way they told the Clone Wars stories, be they in the sequel era, the original trilogy era, the High Republic, maybe anywhere, just somewhere else in the timeline,
Hmm.
and let them tell some really great stories. And you know what? I know Disney loves the original trilogy era. That final scene, man, you had stormtroopers, you had snow troopers, you had pro,
Oh, they
you
look
had
so
you had
good too.
yeah, it looked good. And so you have a little base of assets that you can start with. You're not starting completely from scratch if you wanted to do an original trilogy era show of the same level of quality as Clone Wars, both from a storytelling and visual standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at I don't know if you could really call it metrics, but on Disney Plus, they have like the trending little bar.
Yeah.
And it was always like number one of whenever it came out, like that day. And it would probably be a couple days after that there was a new Clone Wars episode. It's like, yes, come on, people, watch more Clone Wars. We got to tell them that we love this and we need to make more stories like this. Like, don't ever cancel anything Star Wars again because this is what happens is
Yeah.
it breeds success. Because I mean, I was one of those people too that didn't catch Clone Wars when it really first aired. Okay, I watched like one or two episodes and it was like I told a story before I think on the channel like I was like not really huge into Star Wars at that time. In fact, I think I was almost out of Star Wars at that point because it was like there was nothing out, and I thought that animated stuff was probably too kiddish for me or something. So I was like, I'm not gonna pay it any mind of my own. And then somehow I found out it was coming to Netflix, and I said, you know what? Now that it's in an easy to watch form, because before that I was basically like going on LiveWire, LimeWire, and trying to download episodes. That's how I see the movie. And so yeah, I think just the ease of binging, I was able to really appreciate the story. And I think the same thing is happening here at Disney Plus because I've actually had plenty of friends that I'm talking to that are like watching Clone Wars for the first time because they're hearing so much buzz, they're hearing so much positive feedback that they're like, okay, maybe I should really check this thing out. Maybe it's more than just a quote unquote Star Wars animated series. And I'm telling everybody like this is what really matters. And so yeah, hopefully they look at this again, the legacy of the Clone Wars. Like let's
Yeah.
build off of the Clone Wars and create something new but still reminiscent. And again, just keep utilizing the same team, just set it in a different era And there you go. It's quite that simple, and hopefully, I think we'll probably get some kind of buzz or something by at least by the end of the summer. Hopefully, about what's coming next. There's always something in the pipeline, so I'm not really concerned that there's going to be nothing. It's just a matter of when it's announced at this point. So
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like when Clone Wars was first on, it came out at such an interesting time. It was 3 years after Revenge of the Sith. It was at a time when most people thought Star Wars was done for good. And it was just sort of like, it was like the little extra thing that was there to be on Cartoon Network. And I know a lot of people were really cynical about it. They said, it's just for selling action figures and whatever. And, they sold a lot of action figures, like all Star Wars things do. But it was, in a lot of ways, it was George Lucas experimenting the way he always does, which is just, I'm going to make stuff and figure it out as I go. And so the show started off in those early days. It was just kind of there for kids that wanted something extra and for fans that wanted something extra.
okay.
But as it grew, as it got bigger, there started to be a little bit buzz about it. And people started to catch on that, they're doing some interesting stuff over there with that Star Wars show. And then it went off the air right after they announced that there would be new Star Wars movies. So it was at a time when people were really excited about Star Wars, like episode 7, 8, and 9 are coming. It's going to be great. And then they put it on Netflix, and it was in that sort of easy to access space where you could get all the episodes. You didn't have to wait week to week. You didn't have to seek them out, have to do any of that stuff. So you could get through those early ones that maybe didn't land for everybody. And really, once you hit season 2, 3, 4, 5, you start to get to those episodes that are like, these feel like Star Wars movies. And so because it was there at that right time, it started to grow. And naturally, it went off the air at that same time. So it was just kind of there as this like imperfect, unfinished yet amazing thing that people were intrigued by and curious about. And when Disney wanted to create some positive buzz for their streaming service, that was one of the things they looked to as like, there is a growing fan base for this show that was already very passionate when it went off the air, but has only gotten bigger since then. So let's bring it back. Let's give it a try. And people forget, like, Clone Wars was one of the first things that was announced for Disney Plus. It was announced before Disney Plus had a name.
It was like direct to Disney service or something, right?
Yeah. Dave Filoni said to us at the panel, he's like, it's going to be on Disney Direct to Consumer. I'm like, that's a great name. Sure, Dave, that's a great name. But it was one of those first things because, and it generated that buzz. And Mando did a great job of, getting people used to week Star Wars on Disney Plus, and then it went away, and then Clone Wars came back, and people were like, hey. Just like Mandalorian, we can watch it week to week on Disney Plus and be excited about it. And again, the proof is in the pudding with this final season. It delivered for just about everybody.
Yeah, that was one of the things I really enjoyed about experiencing the Clone Wars for the first time was, again, just watching it like vicariously through everybody on Twitter and everything else in the communities. Like every Friday, everybody would be like commenting like crazy, like, "Oh, did you see that?" Like it was just really awesome communal experience that I've never been a part of with the Clone Wars. So I had to catch up on a random day when it was on Netflix and no one else was really watching it with me. So it was just kind of one of those isolation kind of experiences. But then, being on podcasts like yours and being on other people's YouTube channels and stuff like that, talking about it was a heck of a fun time. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, on the last episode of the Clone Wars Strikes Back for this season, I talked about how one of the great things about this season was that it got everybody who loved the Clone Wars together. It got those of us who were there at the end when it went away, and everybody was there at the beginning when it started with the movie, together with all the people that came on board, like yourself, after the fact when it was on Netflix and Disney Plus. And it gave us all this chance to just celebrate it together. And, Star Wars is notorious for people disagreeing about it. And so it was really fun to have those 12 weeks where people were like, put aside what they thought about Rise of Skywalker, about Mandalorian, Last Jedi, about Solo, Rogue One, Force Awakens, the prequels versus the original trilogy. They put it all aside, and everybody who liked Clone Wars, which was so many more people than it used to be, were just excited about new stories. And like you said, every week it was like people were talking about how how good it was instead of, it disappointed me. I wish they'd gone in this direction. I wish they'd done that. Everybody was like, no, this was great. This was awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Now, talking about the format of the show. Now, this is a very interesting design by me. Like for me, experiencing it because I'm so used to like watching serialized TV. Like it's either like Breaking Bad or Sopranos, where it's like one continuous storyline. But
Mhm.
I thought it was such a great idea for a 3 year period of a war. You got so much going on, all different fronts, all different kind of beliefs, different people, everything, and for it to be split up in an anthology format where there, maybe 2 to 3 to 4 episode arcs that take a slice of what is going on at a given time and really deep dive into that kind of character or that location. I really love this. I want to hear from you. Like, what'd you think of going for like the design that the Clone Wars went for?
Yeah, it's cool, and it's not. You can't really think of any other shows that quite do anything like it. It's usually like a sitcom format where it's like each week is a different adventure, and they sometimes build off each other, but not always. You can watch it just about any episode of Friends or The Office at any point, and not really have to know what happened earlier on in that season. Or they do, like you said, Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones or Sopranos or those sort of peak TV kind of shows where it's like, no, you have to watch every episode or
Yep.
you've lost. And Clone Wars did kind of an interesting amalgamation of it where you could jump in at different points in the season and not really have to have seen the previous parts, but you would also but it wasn't every episode that you could do that. You would have to jump in at the beginning of a 4 or 3 or 2 part arc, and that I think is a little bit kind of the fact that a remnant of the fact that George Lucas was so involved in this show and that he came from making feature films and he was always thinking bigger than just a 22-minute episode. And so he would think about it as like, hey, let's make a movie. Let's make a Star Wars movie and we'll just spread it out over 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
You notice that the subsequent shows, especially the animated stuff, Rebels and Resistance, don't really do that same format. They're more kind of a little bit more of the like week to week, kind of building off the previous episode, sometimes not, but they don't do those 4 episode chunks. Even Mando kind of was a little bit.
Yeah.
I was a little bit surprised with
Same.
Mandalorian and how it did feel like there were certain points where you really had to see the previous week, but there were other places where it's like, nah, you can just jump in with this one and it's fine. But Clone Wars kind of gave that mix, and it allowed for them to tell some really drawn out, interesting stories that they wouldn't have been able to, that were maybe a little bit smaller scale
Mm-hmm.
than say a Star Wars movie, but they were bigger than a 22-minute chunk of storytelling. And I think about stuff like the Umbara arc, right?
Ooh, one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's a big, great story. It's not quite big enough for a Star Wars movie the way we think about it. It's not quite Rogue One or Solo or any of the Skywalker saga movies. It's all set on one planet and it all deals with one group of clone troopers. But it because it's told over 4 episodes, they're able to draw out the story in a really intriguing way that builds the tension and has some fun twists and turns and builds to a frankly tragic ending.
Oof, yeah.
And it's really well done, and you couldn't do it on any other show. It's because of this particular format that they were able to tell that story the way they told it, which was probably the best way to tell that story.
Yeah, actually, I think that might be the one exception to Siege of Mandalore where they could probably get away with editing that into an
Yeah.
entire. I haven't watched it recently. I don't know how close like the episodes leave off to one another, but to me, it feels like that could have been a movie. Maybe if somebody edits. Somebody probably already edited it on YouTube at this point.
It probably could be. I really do think you could. That's one where you could cut it together, and it would, because the story is so focused too, right? Like it is one story. Other storylines that are drawn out over 4 episodes are kind of like 4 mini adventures that are all strung together very tightly by one continuous element. But that story is like one story. We're following Rex, Fives, and the rest of the 501st as they deal with the fact that this other Jedi, Pong Krell, has come in to replace Anakin for a week, and he is nothing like Anakin and may actually be evil. Spoiler alert.
I was gonna say I probably should have been like, "Hey, there's gonna be spoilers in this video." I assume if you're watching this video and I have it in the title for the Clone Wars Legacy, you probably are a fan and watched them all by now. So, oh well.
hope, hope so. But it's such a tight focused story, and it's so well done.
Yeah, yeah. Now, another thing I really thought was crazy to me was how much the Force got expanded in the Clone Wars. The way that we see a new side of the Force. We learn about this place called Mortis. We see Yoda learning how to speak to the dead with Qui-Gon Jinn. We learn about the role of two with Bane appearing at the end of season 5. There's just so much awesome lore that thanks to Filoni and especially George Lucas for including it, it's almost
Mhm.
like you have to watch the Clone Wars to really completely understand the Force at this point.
Yeah, the Clone Wars really gives you a deeper appreciation for what the Force is. And it doesn't come out and just spell it out for you either. It makes you think about it, and you have to think about it in the context of the other 6 movies, or the other 9 movies, I would say. But it gives you just different ways of looking at it and different perspectives on what it could be and what balance actually is. And I think it takes those ideas that are present in the film, but just kind of expands on them. I don't think I think you can still understand the Force just by looking at the films. I think all of this stuff that's in the Clone Wars is in there, but it's expanded on and thought about more in the Clone Wars. It really it takes what's there and says, all right, let's explore what this actually means. What does balance of the Force actually mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think the answer is can be found if you really look in the Yoda arc in particular. I think the answer is in there, and it's not what it's maybe not what you think right off the bat. It's a little bit more complicated, and it deals with more than just light and dark. I think it's more than that, and it's a bigger idea, but it's still present a little bit in the films.
Yeah, it's just the mythology there is just so darn good. I
Yeah,
mean, you're getting into the nitty gritty of what it is to be evil and what it is to be a hero, and the whole idea behind Anakin and a chosen one was just
yeah,
something. When I was first watching the arc, I don't think it quite hit me until like maybe the second time I watched the arc about how monumental that all was. But just not
yeah.
even just the Force too, like getting into the Jedi, and especially in this last season, we have everything going on with the Martez sisters, and about how Ahsoka's already preparing to kind of be on her own before Order 66 happens, and the dogma with the Jedi, and seeing how they're so focused on the little things and not actually doing what they're meant to be to help people. So it really gets into what it is to be a Jedi. It supports like that tragic fall of them in Revenge of the Sith even more. And
Mhm.
I think that's another huge win for the Clone Wars is just the way it enhances the prequels. Like I've heard a lot of people that turned 180 degrees on the prequels after watching the Clone Wars. Like so many people were like, "Whoa, the prequels were actually I really like them now. I didn't like them before, but now this show really did it for me."
Yeah, I've heard where people have said like the Clone Wars make up for the prequels, or the Clone Wars are an apology for the prequels. I don't know if that I wouldn't go quite that far, but I do think that a lot of what George learned on the prequels he applied to this show. And there was an interview that him and Dave Filoni did recently that was
Mm-hmm.
featured on the Star Wars show, the official Lucasfilm YouTube Variety Hour or whatever they call it. Um, and in it, George and Dave tell this story. I guess Dave tells the story about George where he says, we would show him the episode and he would then say to them, "What are you trying to say with this episode?" And Dave would explain it. And George would say, "Great. Put that explanation on screen in the story, because you are not going to be in people's homes to explain this to them." And
Oh.
I kind of feel like that's a lesson George learned on the prequels, right? Because all of these ideas, all these ideas that get explored in the Clone Wars are there in the prequel films. They're just harder to grasp in the prequel films because the prequel films, I love them, but they have their issues. And they can sometimes seem they don't always convey what they're trying to convey as well as they should. Sometimes they actually do kind of a bad job of conveying it, but it's in there. And then the Clone Wars kind of takes those ideas and it presents them. It does a better job of integrating the ideas into the story in a way that's palatable to the audience. And so all this stuff about expanding on the Jedi and how they kind of led to their own failure, their own downfall, and how their failings led to all that is much better when you see it. It's so much better played out over the course of the Clone Wars because they were able to tease it out in small ways and build on previous reveals and kind of lay it all out for the audience so that the audience can put it all together and go, oh, that's why the Jedi failed. And it really does come together, I think, in that Martez sisters arc in season 4 and a bit in the Siege of Mandalore arc as well, or season 4 in season 7
Yeah.
and the Siege of Mandalore arc in season 7 as well. It all kind of comes together in there. And then you look at Revenge of the Sith and you're like, oh yeah, okay, I really see how this happened now. And it just makes you think about what's there in the prequels more because they didn't sort of because they did a better job of explaining what they were trying to say within the story, right? Nobody sits down and says, here's why the Jedi fell, but it's there in the story and it's there for the audience to pick up on it very easily if they want to.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times it's we just didn't really get a whole lot of experience to know the Jedi in the prequels. We didn't really spend a whole lot of time with them.
Yeah.
We know Luke Skywalker is a Jedi, but then he was a Jedi that basically got learned from Yoda, but we didn't see Jedi in mass and didn't see what they were supposed to be. So I could see like it could be a little bit confusing. Like, wait, are these really what the Jedi were set out to be, or are they something completely different? And yeah, I mean, we're gonna see that in the High Republic, like the Jedi at their prime. But before that, we didn't know what the heck the Jedi were like. We're like, oh, okay, I guess they just sit around and delegate for like 16 hours a day at the top of this tower. Is that what the
Yeah.
Jedi do, or what?
Yeah, you're right. They did a better job of showing the Jedi in action, and you see remnants of what the Jedi in their actual prime were. But you also see all the ways in which they fell short, the ways in which they followed their rules instead of following what was right. And I think of an episode like the season 2 episode, Bounty Hunters,
Hmm.
where they stumble across this group of farmers. It's really based on Seven Samurai.
Yeah.
They stumble across this group of farmers who are being kind of terrorized by the pirate Hondo and his gang. And the pirates beg Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka for help. And Ahsoka's like, we have to help them. And Obi-Wan of all people is like, can't do anything. Can't do anything. And he's like, I know why you want to help, Ahsoka. I know why you want to do it, but if we fight off the pirates, then the farmers don't learn anything. They'll still be vulnerable the next time a different gang comes by. And that's true. Obi-Wan's right. He's teaching a valuable lesson there that people have to learn to fight for themselves at some point. They can't always rely on other people to fight their battles. But he still just doesn't want to do anything. He doesn't do anything to actually help the farmers. It's like the Jedi, and in that moment
Yeah.
is kind of emblematic of the Jedi at that
Yeah.
point. Is they have reasons for doing what they do, and they're partially right, but they aren't. They don't follow it through to the conclusion where they actually do help people, and that's what Ahsoka and Anakin figure out in that episode, which is how can we actually help these farmers? Well, we can train them to stand up for themselves, and that's what they do. And you get a training montage, and then they fight off Hondo, and then you think, okay, next time some gang of pirates come around, these farmers will be ready. I know that sounds exactly like the same plot of that Mandalorian
Yes,
episode.
because it is.
Because it is. Both, they are both homages to Seven Samurai, but that's the story. But the Clone Wars version has that little kernel in there that that speaks to a larger issue with the Jedi Order that gets further explored in later stories. And so all of that builds up into that moment in Revenge of the Sith when Palpatine is able to turn on them like that.
Oh yeah, that it all builds up to that, and that's what's so brilliant about the storytelling is that it all leads somewhere, and it's clearly driven in a line through the Clone Wars, through these demonstrations by the characters, and it's just the way it's done is pretty elegant, and it's well thought out to the point where it's easily absorbed, right? Getting into, you mentioned bounty hunters, and that's one of the
Yeah.
things I wanted to bring up is the bounty hunters and the locations and really cool characters like
Yeah.
basically the prequels did an incredible job of expanding on the Star Wars original trilogy. That's one of my favorite things about the prequels is all these planets and all these cultures and everything are explored. And the Clone Wars does it like tenfold. Like the
Yeah.
Clone Wars just like, oh, you thought the prequels introduced you a lot? Wait till you see the Clone Wars 7 seasons,
Yeah.
133 episodes of just off the wall craziness at points. I mean, we have one episode of just droids walking around on a planet with the guy that looks like a little Kermit the Frog slug creature thing. And then we'll get like Utapau arc where it's like a dark planet, very alien-esque. You got these things called Utapau or whatever, not Utapauans,
Yeah.
Umbarans coming after you. And it's just like so much stuff. Like every Star Wars fan will appreciate something that they introduced in the Clone Wars.
Yeah, and you look at the popularity of some of the stuff that they introduced in Clone Wars, and it just speaks to the fact that they tapped into something with this show that spoke to that core central Star Wars story and statement. And you look at the popularity of Ahsoka right away. There's the big one. She's one of the most popular Star Wars characters, which is hard to believe if you remember the time when the Clone Wars movie came out and the initial
Yep.
reaction. She's just grown in people's esteem by leaps and bounds to the point where J.J. Abrams, who you know didn't do a whole lot of acknowledging of the prequels in his Star Wars movies, included her in the Rise of Skywalker very
Mm-hmm.
briefly in the Jedi voices sequence with Rey. You look at Captain Rex, another very popular character, and you look at Hondo Onaka, the pirate, who, if you told me back when I first saw the first Hondo episodes, that guy would be the face of a ride at Disneyland, I never would have believed you. One, because I'll be honest, the first time I saw Hondo, wasn't a fan. It took until season 2, specifically his involvement in the Boba Fett arc, for
Okay.
me to go, okay, I like this
Yep.
character. And then I go back and look at those early episodes, and I'm like, oh yeah, I was just missing something the first
Yeah,
time I saw
yeah, because like you first see him and he's like such a jerk, and
yeah,
I'm kind of like, okay, he has to get put down. Like this guy's annoying me. Just slice this guy with a lightsaber already. Like get him out of the picture. And
yeah,
then he
yeah.
shows up again, and then it's like, oh, he's growing on to me, I guess.
And now you go to Disneyland, and there he is, right there on the Millennium Falcon. Uh, he's become such a popular character. You look at Mandalorian, and you look at the casting rumors for what's coming up in season 2. There's some pretty deep Clone Wars connections, and it's introduced a whole other. Just added so many new layers to the Star Wars galaxy with great characters, like you said, great planets that look nothing like the stuff we've seen on on film. There's some planets in Clone Wars I wish we could get to see live action. Dathomir is one, and I
Ooh.
was really excited when Maul said Dathomir and Solo. I'm like, all right, sequel time. We're gonna get to see Dathomir live action, and that's a topic for another day. But there's a lot more alien planets and that sort of thing, and I'd like to see them in the live action stuff try and do some stuff that's more than just a forest or a desert. We can't get rid of forests or deserts. I don't want to. They're part of the Star Wars iconography. But I would like to see maybe one or two planets that's a little bit more alien. Let's get like a forest that's all red, like Dathomir, or something a little more jungly, we saw Felucia in Revenge of the
Yeah,
Sith.
yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
spend
Felucia
some
was like the most alien planet we've seen.
yeah, and we only see it for like 15 seconds. So, I'd like to see some more stuff like that. That's one of those elements of the Clone Wars that they've done a lot in animation that I sort of think like, can we try that a little bit? Not too much, but a little bit in the films, in the live action. That'd be pretty cool.
Now you mentioned a huge name in there, a name that a lot of people forgot about, and he came back to life. Now, it's a
Mhm.
character many people loved seeing in that trailer for Phantom Menace. Darth Maul. Darth Maul came back. Now that's huge. Like, wait a minute. Like this character that got killed supposedly in a feature film got brought back into the Clone Wars and became, in my opinion, one of the best things about the Clone Wars, especially at that last part of the story there. I mean, that itself is a huge success for them to bring this character back and do him justice and actually improve his character so much more, because we didn't get a lot of him in Phantom Menace, and to see like everything about him and his conniving nature and just the way he's able to wrangle up the underworld is just super fascinating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when we first heard that Darth Maul was coming back. It was one of those things where it's sort of like, that's exciting because the character has taken on this kind of place in Star Wars and pop culture of like, sort of legendary status despite only having a handful of minutes of screen time in the Phantom Menace. And so it's exciting just the idea of getting to see more of that. And again, in an instance where Clone Wars, lived up to the expectations, the expectations were very high because not only was Maul really cool in Phantom Menace, but he'd had 12, 13 years, something like that, to build on that hype since the film came out. And so people had this really epic, legendary vision of Maul. And he comes back and he's pretty damn close to it in those first episodes, and he really builds up to it, and again kind of exceeds it in Siege of Mandalore. And I remember people saying at the time, like, why are they bringing back this character? Characters should stay dead, that sort of thing. And I do agree with that. I generally think if you kill a character, there should be consequences there, and they
Mm-hmm.
should stay dead. And one of the nice things about Star Wars is that we don't tell stories in order all the time. So if you think of a really great story for that character, you can just set it in their backstory. But if they do bring a character back, then you have to make sure that the story was worth bringing them back for. And the story with Maul was absolutely worth it. Those are some of the best episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Those two episodes with him at the end of season 4 are really solid. His 4-part arc in season 5, where he goes to Mandalore and just starts
Ooh.
doing chaos, is fantastic. And of course, his role in Siege of Mandalore is incredible. And I wish we could see the Son of Dathomir storyline that they published as a
Yeah.
comic
Mm-hmm.
animated. I think that would have been great. And I think it's because of that success that they decided to bring him in Solo. And looked like they were getting ready to spin him off into something in
Ah.
sequel. And I just and right down to the fact that they had Sam Witwer voice him when he didn't voice him in the film. That was somebody else. It was Peter Serafinowicz. But they actually recorded both Sam and
Yeah,
Peter,
I heard this.
and they chose to go with Witwer. And I thought, well, that's a good call, because that's we've heard more of Sam's version of Darth Maul than we did of Peter Serafinowicz's version. And I think it was a little bit of a nod to the character's popularity in
Yeah.
Clone Wars and in Rebels, where Sam voiced him as well. And I hope someday to see what the Solo spinoff would have been, and to explore that story some more, because I think there's more to be done with this character. And I like I said, I generally think if a character dies, they should stay dead. But this is one instance where bringing him back has led to so much interesting possibilities, that they have delivered on a bunch of them so well, that I want to see where they go next with it. And I'm really glad they did it.
Yeah, I mean, just all the success. Like, I haven't heard one bad thing mentioned by anybody, like saying that, oh, Maul was a waste in this arc or anything.
Yeah.
Like everybody is riding so high on the fact that Maul came back and he had that awesome duel with Ahsoka. And the way it leaves off, I mean, now would be the time for hopefully Disney and Lucasfilm to kind of capitalize on the hype, and maybe to get something going sooner than they thought, because seriously, like, ride on the hype wave. Everybody just wants to see what happened. Like, you see him with an Inquisitor's lightsaber in the damn Solo movie, so it's like, I want to know that story. Yeah, you can interpret what could have happened in between, but I mean, when it all comes down to it, we want to see Ray Park in live action as
Yeah.
Maul again, fighting something.
They've had so much success on Disney Plus. I just think they need to call up Ray. They need to call up Amelia Clark and just say, "Come on, you guys, sign on, and we'll get a show going," and do some kind of Star Wars Underworld TV show, where they explore that. And, I kind of think it would probably culminate with some kind of showdown between Darth Maul and Darth Vader. And you're not going to tell me that people aren't going to buy tickets to see that, because that is
Ooh.
another one of those things that people have been sort of dreaming up and speculating on for years. And so imagine seeing that in live action. How
Oh my gosh.
we've seen how cool Maul can be in fights in Clone Wars, and we've seen how cool and what they
Ah.
with Vader in Rogue One. Put it together, you get Rey in there, you get a great stunt performer in the Vader suit, and
That'd
man,
be crazy.
throw down.
Oh man.
And you do that in season 2 or season 3, and then you continue the story going forward with Kira running Crimson Dawn and having to deal with the fallout of it or something. I don't know, I'm just
Ah.
spitballing here, but that is a story I really hope they choose to tell. And I hope they look at the success of Clone Wars not just as the success of this one particular animated series, but as the success of the prequel era, and that to show that there's interest in the prequel era and people are hungry for more stories involving those characters, and see that and go, okay, maybe we won't do a prequel era show, but we'll take a character from the prequel era who was kind of central to the prequel era and make them central to us, another show, which they're kind of doing with Ewan McGregor and the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, but do that with Ray Park as Darth Maul, and have Sam Witwer on set there to work out the voices and stuff with him. And then I mean, they're doing some interesting things with Boba Fett. It sounds like you could have him in an Underworld show. We haven't seen much from the Hutts lately. Let's bring in Jabba, get some of those characters in there. Get Amelia Clark back as Kira. Yeah, have Lando and Han do guest appearances. Get Alden
Mhm.
Ehrenreich, Donald Glover back, and just build out the Underworld aspect of Star Wars on the small screen on the Disney Plus, and kind of give people a chance to see what they missed with Solo. Let Solo be kind of the backdoor pilot to this whole other world of Star Wars TV, is set in the Underworld. And there's a little bit of a precedent here. We're talking about the legacy of the Clone Wars. You want to talk about a Star Wars film that underperformed that led to a really successful TV series? Boom, Clone Wars right there. Do it again, live action. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, let's go, let's go. I think another thing that was so well done by the Clone Wars is the fact that it's able to play stories between the lines. Like we were just talking
Yeah.
on length about Darth Maul, but you have a character that was introduced as Anakin Skywalker's apprentice,
Yeah.
and you follow her story along the whole way. You're thinking, there's no way she's gonna survive. I mean, Order 66 kills off all the Jedi. How do you have a Jedi around that's the apprentice and Padawan of Anakin who turns into Vader? That's just not gonna happen. And what about this guy named Captain Rex? Oh, he's totally a goner. He's a clone trooper. He'll get killed by a Jedi somewhere along the way. Like there's, and then they somehow thread these characters through another series, Star Wars Rebels, and then, like you said, put her in the Rise of Skywalker, and there's going to be probably other things that they show up in later this year. It's like the way the Clone Wars is able to spin out characters and fill in the gaps. And,
Yeah.
and do them in such a great crafted way that doesn't feel like it's been forced, but feels like it's been organic. And this is the way that the story should have always been, even though a lot of the future stories with the original trilogy and stuff have already been set in stone for 40 years. These characters will be able to maneuvered throughout those events and work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the success of the Clone Wars in a lot of ways is the success of Ahsoka Tano and Captain Rex, and they've become real staples of Star Wars. They are characters that people know and love, and I think it just, again, it speaks to what they did in the storytelling, but it also speaks to their commitment to the show. And again, a lot of that is due to George Lucas. George was going to make the show whether he had somewhere to air it or not. They started working on it before they had any sort of deal with Cartoon Network or any other channel. So when the show got started with the movie, and people were not exactly in love with some of these early characters, George just kind of had the team keep working on it, and they developed the characters and they evolved them and they had them grow and become something that people really came to love. And they didn't just love the characters as they were in the final season of Clone Wars. They came to really love and appreciate the journey that the characters went on. And that's something that I think is an important lesson to Star Wars storytellers and Star Wars decision makers, is that you can build a really big, really loyal audience by following through with the characters you start with. And there will be some rocky roads and some rough seas along the way. And you have to not bail, you have to not jump ship at that and revert back to old reliables. Because if you stick with the characters that people fell in love with at the beginning of the journey, that's the audience that's going to carry you forward. The people that decided they don't like those characters, they're going to jump ship and they're probably not going to come back. But if you want things to carry forward, you have to stick with the characters that are actually carrying the story. And that's what they did with Ahsoka and Rex, as well as plenty of other characters that came on for episodes here and there of Clone Wars that people really grew to love. Some of the clones, characters like Hondo, some of the other Jedi. And they carried that story all the way through. And then you look at that final season, you had a Rex arc, you had an Ahsoka arc, and then you had a Rex and Ahsoka arc. Whereas, Anakin and Obi-Wan were part of those stories, but they weren't the focus the way they were in the early days, and the way they could have easily become if George or somebody else had decided, well, people don't like Ahsoka, so we'll just write her out of the show and we'll make it all about Anakin. No, they continued to grow and evolve Ahsoka, and people stuck with that character. And now, like I said, she's one of the most popular characters, and there's a ton of excitement for what's going to come next with her. Something that, again, you go back to 2008 and you tell those Ahsoka fans who seem like they're the only ones, that there's not many of them, that she's going to be in the Mandalorian live action. They would never believe you.
Nope. What? This girl called Snips and Sky Guy and Artui? What? But she's getting her own show? Or what's going on here?
But they grew the characters and they stayed true to the journey that those characters were on, and they didn't try and overcorrect overcorrect when the loud negative voices were making a stink. Because honestly, those people probably weren't going to come back and going to change their minds anyways. And I hope that in the future, Star Wars storytellers and Star Wars decision makers look to the Clone Wars for the path to follow, because again, it leads to a really big and loyal audience. I can't say I think they've done that lately in certain places, but I think that is the path, and I think a lot of the future of Star Wars can be discovered both in sort of an in-universe and out-of-universe way. If you look at the trajectory of the Clone Wars and the successes and relative failures of the show.
True. So, talking about the formation of the Empire through the years on the Clone Wars, I find that incredibly fascinating, as you have a relatively tight formation of time in this area of Star Wars galaxy, like 3 years, not a huge amount of time, but throughout those years, you actually see the transformation from the Republic to the Empire, not just visually from seeing the armor of the clones go from phase 1 to phase 2, and then where you'll see him in the Siege of Mandalore Order 66, but you see things like Tarkin and his belief system, and him talking to Anakin at the Citadel and about his beliefs, and you see just various things like that will set itself up. So the Clone Wars does a great job of just bridging the gap. I like the series because it just bridges the gap so well. If you want to find out how this thing happened over time underneath everybody's noses and they didn't know it, like the Empire was really there the whole time. It was just a matter of one speech given by one guy, and all these machinations come to fruition because he's been laying the seeds. Palpatine has been laying the seeds this entire time for this transition of power to take place.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tarkin's a great example of that. And also, just you look at the visuals of the show, they in places the show really starts to look, the Republic really starts to look like the Empire. And there's some scenes where you'd be like, you can look at stuff and you would be forgiven for thinking, hey, is that set on the Death Star?
Yeah, really.
it looks like an Imperial thing, and that happens gradually over the course of the series. And yeah, I really like what you said there about Tarkin and how all these people who become the Empire are just they're there, and they are the ones that kind of rise to the surface. And Tarkin is a great example of that. He over the course of his limited appearances on the show, he gets closer and closer to the
Uh-huh.
Emperor. Starts off as just a captain, and then he's kind of like he kind of has the ear of the Emperor or of the Chancellor, I should say.
Yeah, it's about to be the Emperor at that point.
Yeah, later on. And then, even a character like Yularen, who is there from the
Yeah.
beginning and seems like a good guy. He's helping out. He's working with Anakin and Ahsoka and the clones and trying to do the right thing. And over the course of the series, he kind of starts shifting to being a bit more of a jerk. And he really appears that way in in season 6 when he's
Oh
really
yeah.
really having to go at Trace Martez for flying in the wrong lane. But really, he there's nothing about him that would make you think, oh, he's going to be evil. And yet there he is. They based his character off a guy who was in the background on the Death Star. He was at
Mm-hmm.
that meeting with Tarkin and Vader and Mahdi and the Station of Valley Ultimate Power in the Universe. That meeting, he was there. He's there. And then you see him on Rebels, and he is full on bad guy in those episodes. It shows like that. It was all there. All the infrastructure was in place, and all Palpatine had to do was just make a few things happen, make a few little crises happen, and one big one. And then all of a sudden, he was able to just kind of flick a switch.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
didn't happen. It didn't happen overnight. Hey, and Clone Wars does a really good job of showing how that happens and how that's built out over a long period of time, and little things like I said, the visual change in the show, the phase 1 versus phase 2 armor, that kind of comes from Revenge of the Sith, and that was doing the same kind of thing, right? The phase 2 armor is much more stormtroopery
Uh-huh.
than the phase 1, but it just shows that they're getting closer and closer to being the Empire and not the Republic that in the original trilogy they're kind of hoping to get back to.
Yeah, now the Clone Wars also they did something that I don't think any other Star Wars animated series has done so far. And that is actually talking about heroes on both sides, as mentioned in the opening crawl for Revenge of the Sith. We get quite a bit from the opposing side of the war, from the Separatists, Lux Bonteri and his mother, and all the
Yep.
politicians on that side. And for a couple of those episodes, you can kind of see from their point of view and their perspective about like, oh, why might people actually be free to join the Separatists? You would think just like, oh, everybody in the Separatists are probably like all slaves or they're programmed to believe that they're good. But no, these people actually have a say, and they actually have a little governmental meeting, whatever Senate hearing or whatever. But you actually see from that side of things, and in Star Wars, we really don't see that a lot. Usually, everything's black and white. It's either the First Order or the Resistance, or the Rebellion or the Empire. You're either good or you're bad. So that to me was setting quite a precedent for Star Wars in that hey, sometimes there's heroes on both sides, literally.
Yeah, I love that episode, Heroes on Both Sides. It's one of my favorites from the series. And for the exact reason that you're saying is it shows the Separatists in a different light. And I remember watching that episode, and they show the Separatist Parliament, I think they call it. And Mina Bonteri is there, and she's giving this speech, and she was this friend of Padme's, who Padme and her just had. They both wanted what was best and what was right for the galaxy. They just had disagreements and on how to go about doing that, but they still believed in each other and they still trusted each other to the point where they would have this kind of meeting, and even as their sides are at war. And Mina's giving this speech, and then there's Count Dooku leading
Uh huh.
the proceedings. I remember thinking like, oh, this poor separatists, they're just so duped. They think they have this democratic
Yeah.
power. And Dooku's there controlling it all, and he's a start. And I thought, oh shit, that's the Republic too. We got Sheev Palpatine there. He's again, the senators think they're doing the right thing, and that they're following that they're doing the democratic thing. And there's all these characters that have really strong beliefs that are trying to do the right thing. Padme, Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, all these characters we know of as heroes, and yet they're doing all of this in front of the Dark Lord of the Sith, and it doesn't matter
Yeah.
what in the end, and it's the same thing is happening on both sides.
Yeah.
And the show does a fairly good job of presenting the separatist case as, not necessarily being wrong. In fact, being kind of right. They think the Republic is corrupt. The Republic is corrupt. They just didn't realize that they were also being controlled and manipulated. And that's kind of the tragedy of the prequels, is that everybody is being controlled and manipulated, and they don't know, and they don't realize it, and they don't know how to get out of it before it's too late.
Yeah, it's like you see the whole galaxy at large. I mean, you see what is happening on neutral planets, right? Like you have like Mandalore or the one planet that's in ambush. What is that one called? Toydaria? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
Toydaria. Like there's actually neutral planets, and you have two separate entities coming to the planet. Hey, I'm with the Republic. Hey, I'm with the Separatists. This is why you should join the Republic. And then somebody sabotages the other, and then it's like, no, this is why you need to be just So what's really interesting is actually seeing how that whole works. And again, just the fact that we get to see these governments in play. We don't see that in any other Star Wars, and it just makes everything much more enriched and much more realistic, much more real to life. And again, able to experience a story that you can kind of see in today's world, where some of this stuff might get drawn
Yeah.
into reality a little bit, which is pretty neat for Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars has always been kind of playing on what's happening in current events to a certain degree. So to see that again, like portrayed through an animated series that we think is for kids, here we're talking about all this stuff, and it's like, no, it's not just like little surface level stuff. This is Star Wars at its finest.
Yeah, absolutely. The I'm of the opinion that Star Wars, or politics, makes Star Wars better. That that was kind of one of those things that came out of the prequel trilogy, where people were like, "Oh, the films, they deal with politics too much. That's no good. We don't want that in our Star Wars." And I'm like, "Oh, that makes it richer. It makes it better. It expands the universe, and it allows for different types of stories to be told that are just as meaningful and resonant as your more basic hero's journey, which is what Luke goes on. And I think the political side of Star Wars, be it kind of its messages, or just also showing the the functions of government and its relative strengths and flaws, and what can be done about it, and how, I think that's a good thing. And I think it makes for interesting stories. And again, the Clone Wars, especially with that Heroes on Both Side episode, really shows that how that works. There's other places where the Clone Wars delves into some political stories where it doesn't do quite as well. There's a few in there that are maybe a bit wonky and a bit not as exciting, but I think it's all for the better. It all paints an interesting picture of the galaxy, and is saying something about our world. Not, maybe it's not necessarily commenting on the politics of the moment, although it certainly feels like it is at times. But it is saying something to be for people to think about and be wary of in their own lives, which the best stories do. And they do that a bit for politics. They do that for the type of people you let into your life, and they do that for the choices that you make. They don't provide a simple roadmap, but they do. Stories should make you think. I think you should be able
Yeah.
to enjoy them
Mm-hmm.
and go, yeah, that was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But they should stay with you, and you should think about the choices that were made, and you can compare them to your own life. And again, it's not a simple roadmap. It's not that easy. But they can offer some insight, and the best stories do that.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Talking about the audio now, specifically the music. I mean, the audio itself is fantastic. I mean, it's
Mm.
Star Wars, right? You got blasters, you got lightsabers, and it sounds incredible. But when it comes to the music, again, we're talking about the legacy of Clone Wars. I keep repeating that because this is a series that sets its precedent for everything that comes after. The music by Kevin Kiner. You actually had the opportunity to interview him on your podcast, and I loved listening to that episode. But this guy, he absolutely gets it. Like it's just
Yeah.
incredible. I just going from the very first implementation of the way that the main theme is used,
Hmm.
in every episode. It's funny because I spent the last couple months up into the release of the Clone Wars season 7 rewatching the whole series. I wasn't really watching it. I had it on in the background on my tablet as I'm painting my little Star Wars Legion miniature guys. And of course, my mother, I do it in the kitchen with everything. So my mom's there most of the time, and she's even addicted. Like I find herself like humming the intro song, and she's never watched a single episode of Clone Wars. Like it's just so catchy, and she's just like humming it every time it comes on. Like, yep, I'm watching another episode of Clone Wars. Like, it's just like that's how much of an impact it was. But it's like it had to be scary, like for him to create a song that's different than what normal Star Wars is. For him to come up with something to have to do that, he kind of explained it on your podcast.
Yeah.
Definitely, guys, go check out the was it on the Clone Wars Strikes Back or was it on the Star Wars main show?
That it was on the main Star Wars Underworld show.
Okay.
It was the week before the Clone War, or I think it was the same week that Clone Wars came out. Like I think we recorded the episode on Thursday, and it came out on Friday, the same round about the same time that the Clone Wars episode was coming out on Disney Plus. So it was fun. It was like right at the same time. It was perfect timing to talk to Kevin. But yeah, he tells that story of how he came up with that theme and how it was like, how do you come up? How do you make a better version of the
Yeah.
Star Wars theme?
Oh man.
But he delivered on something that was really good and captured what everybody loves about the Star Wars theme, while also making it a little bit more unique and letting you know that this was going to be a different kind of Star Wars. And he did a great job throughout the series of coming up with new music while also using a little bit of John Williams, not a ton, not as much as he would use on the later series Star Wars Rebels, but using a little bit. And also developing his own themes, which really come to the forefront in the Siege of Mandalore,
Oh
with
yeah.
the Ahsoka theme in particular. And there's one moment
Incredible.
there's one moment in that first episode of the Siege of Mandalore where it goes from the Force theme, the iconic
Yeah.
Star theme of Luke Skywalker looking out at the twin suns, the Force theme, into the Ahsoka theme.
Yeah.
Was done so seamlessly and perfectly. It was almost like the music was saying, Ahsoka is Star Wars now.
And then they actually have a little trace of a Rey theme. And it's like about to go into the Rey theme when she lands on the platform with the explosion. And then it
Yeah.
just like immediately goes back to something else. And it's like, oh my gosh, they just combined like three like
Yeah.
motifs together or whatever. And it's like, what?
Yeah. It's almost like Ahsoka is laying the groundwork for Rey. It's almost
Yeah.
like that's what they're saying.
Oh wow. That's a really, really good yeah, that's awesome. And just not about the Skywalker saga music, like the music he created originally, especially in those earlier seasons, was like really strange for Star Wars, but it
Yeah.
kind of works. Like the
Yeah.
whole battle on Teth, like when
Mhm.
they're walking up the side of the thing, and it's like and the rock music. I believe you guys have that rock track in
Yeah.
the Clone Wars Strikes Back intro music. I love that. It's just like this rock song that just like cranks on with the clones coming in. It's like, oh, this is the music that the clones would have blaring on the LAATs as they're going into battle. Like this is exactly how they would be, like, the warriors always in Vietnam or whatever, blasting Rolling Stones and all that kind of that same thing happening in this show. And then like at
Yeah.
some certain parts they would go into like a Jabba's palace or somebody, and it'd be like this like Indian influenced type music with this different kind of singing. It was like so alien, but it fit in with Star Wars. And so for him to be like risky with just going like way different was super cool, and I appreciated that a hell of a lot.
Yeah. He brought in, he used a lot of stuff that was familiar, that reminds us of Star Wars and reminds us of what we know, especially if we're in North America or parts of Europe. Like it's really familiar. And then he brought in all these other influences, and he was able to use these different types of music to just expand the world and make it sound different and more rich. And it's an entire galaxy, right? And you think of all the music and all the types of music we have just on this one planet for
Mm-hmm.
all the cultures, and you extrapolate that a trillion fold out into a galaxy of trillions of planets, and so of course you're going to have just such a rich array of music. And he did such a good job of pulling from so many different Earth cultures to build out this really rich tapestry of the universe of Star Wars music.
Yeah. Oh man, it really is good, and I believe they sell all the soundtracks. So yeah,
Yeah.
if you guys want to download them, they're all up there somewhere, I guess, on iTunes and whatnot.
Yeah, and the the soundtracks for each arc of season 7. You can stream them all on Spotify.
Oh, I
Yeah,
gotta do that. Especially
yeah,
that
yeah.
awesome Ahsoka theme. I gotta listen to that on loop over and over again. It's so epic, man.
So good,
You,
so good.
yeah, so I want to finish up talking about the two creators themselves to finish up this episode here. So let's start by talking about Dave Filoni. Now, Dave Filoni is pretty much a household name now. Like people that
Crazy.
aren't even really into Star Wars fandom are like doing interviews for like Mandalorian, and they're just randomly dropping Dave Filoni's name now. Like, oh yeah, this guy, he's well known in Hollywood, but like we've known him as fans, but like, and it's because of this show that he has really garnered all the attention that he deserves because this guy is literally like the apprentice, the Padawan of George Lucas. George Lucas essentially showed this guy everything he knew.
Hmm.
And if it wasn't for Filoni, none of this exists. And then Rebels wouldn't exist, Resistance wouldn't exist,
Yeah.
Mandalorian wouldn't exist because Dave Filoni had Jon Favreau as one of the voice actors doing it, and he tapped him to help him make the show. So Dave Filoni is really like the biggest thing about Star Wars right now, and it's because he was like us, like a fan, right? Like he was there at the midnight showing of Revenge of the Sith. He was making cosplay of Plo Koon. Like he was doing everything like that we would do, right? But
Yeah.
he is like literally knows so much of everything thanks to George Lucas. And yeah, this guy, he's incredible, and he's awesome to fans. Like you've had a chance to interview him somewhere, right? New York Comic Con, I think that was the first time I met you actually.
Yeah.
Was
It was
like
funny.
on your way to go to interview him. I'm like, hey, you're from Star Wars Underworld, and like it was like, oh cool, I gotta go interview Dave Filoni. I'm like, what? It's like
Yeah, that was quite the day. That was pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, Dave is like you said, he was a fan. He was kind of he was sort of the hometown boy that made it big. We think about this like Star Wars fandom and all the stuff that we do. He was a guy who was doing that, and then somebody said to him, "Hey, do you want to make a Star War? You want to make this Star Wars show?" And on the Disney Gallery Mandalorian show, he tells this funny story about the
I
first time
love
he
that
was
story.
called by Lucasfilm. He at first thought he was being pranked, and then when he realized he was being pranked, he wasn't being pranked. He started saying too much, and he said like, "I'm building a Jedi costume in my garage." And the Jedi he wasn't making Obi-Wan Kenobi or Luke Skywalker or anything like that. He was making Plo Koon, right? Like just that background character in the prequel trilogy, whose like biggest moment up to that point had been like moving his hands a little bit, like this, this is an obscure character that he's building that. So he has that like hometown boy who made it kind of vibe to him. And for a long time he felt like he was our little secret as fans. Like we as fans of the Clone Wars knew of him as, oh, he's this guy who made it, and he works alongside George Lucas. And then somewhere along the line, like you said, he started to become more known in Hollywood. And so it's really funny to me when you have people who are working on Mandalorian talking about him, who are big stars in their own right, like Pedro Pascal or Carl Weathers or whoever. They're talking about working with Dave Filoni and how cool it was to work with this guy Dave Filoni, and they tell stories about him, like doing his sketches and that sort of thing, and they sound like the old stories we would just hear from the Clone Wars cast. And it's like, oh wow, this guy's a big deal now because these are bigger stars. These are people we'd heard of through other things. Where like, yeah, Dave is just there on set sketching away, and we love working with Dave, and it's really like, wow, he really has made it big at this point. And you talk about the legacy of the Clone Wars. A lot of ways that's personified by Dave Filoni and the influence that he now wields at Lucasfilm on Star Wars projects. Be it animated stuff like he created Star Wars Resistance. He kind of got that show up and running before handing it off to other people. He obviously was the showrunner for Star Wars Rebels, and then he got sort of called up to the next level to do the live action stuff with Favreau. And I think he is really somebody that they turn to a lot there when they need kind of a Star Wars ruling, because like you said, he learned from George, and I think his role is just going to continue to grow and expand. And I think eventually he's going to be showrunner for his own live action show.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows, maybe he'll be the one directing a big Star Wars movie someday. I kind of wonder if that might be his final act. When he's ready to retire, his sort of final thing will be to direct a live action Star Wars movie, and that's when he will finally, hang up his cowboy hat and retire afterwards. That's just
No.
I don't want that to be the case, but that's my kind of guess is that he'll keep kind of working on TV and keep kind of doing all this stuff, and then at a certain point, when it's time for him to retire, his final thing will be to do that, or he could be announced to do the next movie after Taika Waititi, and we'd all be fine with that as well.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah, just a quick aside on the gallery Mandalorian on the latest episode. It kind of warmed my heart so much because you see this one scene of him like with VO with Pedro Pascal, and
mhm.
Dave Filoni is like in his element. He's like, "Oh man, I've been doing VO in a box with people for like 10 years, 12 years of my life. Like this is what I'm good at here."
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it was just like so great to see, like, oh yeah, he's working with Pedro. Pedro's like a lot of voice acting with his role because there's two other actors. But just the same interview you referenced before with the Star Wars show, talking about like how they treated this like it was a live action movie, the Clone Wars. Like everything behaves the way the story is being told, the narrative, as if it's a live action or a film. So he's really kind of been preparing for this his whole life, kind of in a different kind of way. And now that he's getting his feet wet with these live action series, which you might as well call them movies at this point, because I mean they're even like pretty much like mini movies anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're gonna see what happens, but I think in our lifetime we'll see him do at least one.
I think so. I think so too. It seems inevitable at this point, and I don't mean inevitable in a bad way. I mean it's one of those things we're just waiting for it to happen now.
Yeah, because I mean you got to think about it. Like he's with absolutely brilliant cast and crew of people around him. Like all the names they have attached to the Mandalorian, most of those people are super well known in Hollywood and super experienced. I mean, you have Jon Favreau, then you have all these new people coming in to direct episodes like Rodriguez and the guy from Ant-Man, and just so many visionaries in film that all this is going to rub off on him. And like it or not, if you like the episodes he directed in season one, I mean, he's only going to get better because you get better with experience, and he strikes me as the type of person that will learn from the people as much as he can that he's surrounded by, and that's really the best prospect you can have is being able to absorb all this knowledge around you and use it purposefully.
Yeah, and I mean he directed the first episode, the one that got
Yeah,
everybody in the first place. So
really.
yeah, so I know not everybody loves the Tatooine episode. I
Yeah.
think it's got its highs and lows, and overall it's a good solid
Mm-hmm.
episode. Even if there's a few points in it where I'm like, I don't know about that, but overall it's pretty good. But he directed the first episode, which is just a rip roaring good time with the Mandalorian and IG-11, and ending on that reveal of Baby Yoda. Like, yeah, I think this guy's going places. I think he's gonna. If the rumors about a live action Ahsoka show are true, then he would have to be the showrunner for that. I think.
Yeah, Ahsoka's his baby. He does not let anybody mess with Ahsoka.
Yeah, I don't know who else would do that, but I'd also like to see him be showrunner for a show that just starts from scratch as well, that just sort of goes from the beginning as its own
Wow.
thing. I'd also eventually, perhaps sooner rather than later, love to see him direct at least one Star Wars film. Again, I think this guy gets it. I think he has a really deep understanding of what Star Wars is and of its most critical elements. And so, yeah, he should get his shot. And if you don't understand why, just look at the Siege of Mandalore, and then I think that'll convince you.
I mean, come on, like this guy has been able to thread a through line through Revenge of the Sith with his animated series so expertly.
Yeah,
You go between certain scenes, you're weaving in and out. Now imagine if he could do that. That's incredibly hard. But imagine what he's given if he's given all the tools with all new characters with no attachments to anybody. Like I would love to see that story where he doesn't have anybody that's known, that he just can play in a sandbox with anybody that he feels like making and just creating this ongoing thing.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I think that would be really cool. And again, there's a lot of things I hope for in the future of Star Wars, and a good many of them revolve around Dave Filoni getting different projects.
So I want to finish up tonight's episode talking about the maker himself, George Lucas, and just the sad fact. Think about this for a minute. The Clone Wars is the final thing, at least that we know right now, probably, that George Lucas will have ever touched when it came to Star Wars. So just that impact, everything that he left in this series to tell future stories, for kids to enjoy for years and years to come, because he created Star Wars for everybody's younger self, for the kids coming up. That's what mythology is about, is to teach these epic legends for kids to learn from and to experience, and for adults like us to, stay as a kid at heart, so what do you have to say about George Lucas? And this is really it for him, right now, at least.
Yeah, it was really special the way every episode ended with created by George Lucas.
Hmm.
Including in this final season when he really wasn't involved all that much anymore. He wasn't involved on a day to day anymore. Um, but excuse me, sorry. Sorry, sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice. Um, I'm getting so choked up talking about George.
Yeah, I could tell.
Um, but he, but so it was really nice to see that at the end of every episode, even though he wasn't involved on a day to day basis, and in this show, in a lot of ways, I think is his great legacy. Obviously, he'll be most remembered for the Star Wars films, and those obviously, I mean, all of Star Wars is an amazing accomplishment, the likes of which we've barely ever seen again. It's really incredible, and but this show I think was his kind of way of not just expanding the animated form, but of hopefully introducing Star Wars fans and people who enjoy Star Wars stories to an even wider range of storytelling, not just not for them, not just to be engaged in Star Wars, but to different types of stories. George has said, he doesn't want Star Wars to be, all consuming, which, oops, but in Clone Wars, he takes the universe and he uses it as a vehicle to introduce other types of stories. There are political stories that are just sort of political intrigue. There are more mystical stories. There's Godzilla stories and Hitchcock thrillers and detective movies and war movies and horror episodes and all sorts of things. It's broadening Star Wars out into so many different directions, so that it's not just constantly remaking the original trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of showing that Star Wars can be more than just what it already is. And I think that's something George really wanted to do. And I think that's what he would have done if he'd made his version of the sequel trilogies. It would have been, for as much as the sequels pushed the boundaries in their own way, I think George would have just blown up the boundaries and just gone in every crazy.
Oh yeah.
Because he never was content to just make Star Wars as it was. He wanted to expand it, and he wanted to show that it can be different things, and hopefully introduce people to, I think with the show at least, introduce people to other types of stories that they can explore and enjoy on their own. And I think the Clone Wars, virtually every arc is inspired by something else. And so if you like that arc, you should seek out those stories that inspired it. And again, it opens people up to a whole other world of storytelling beyond just Star Wars, which, we love Star Wars, obviously, but, it's good to see other stories as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's, it's, this show in a lot of ways is his legacy. It's everything that he learned making films. He's then putting into the animation, and he's just going after every type of story he likes and trying to put his little version of it. And it's really incredible. And like I said, he stayed the course with what he wanted to do. He didn't let anybody tell him that this character isn't polling well, is not responding well, should do something else. He's like, no, I have a story I want to tell, and I'm going to tell it. And I've always admired that about George, the way he sticks to his guns. And I think you really see it in the Clone Wars. And he was willing to, he's a guy he's very rich. He's an eccentric billionaire, and it's nice to see eccentric billionaires, saying like, oh, just here's some money, make a great show, instead of here's some money, I'm going to go be insane over there. I like it. I like my eccentric billionaires to just sort of be like, all right, you guys make a cool show. I'm just going to go over here and look at some art.
Yeah, what I really dig about the Clone Wars and George Lucas is the fact he treats it kind of like his passion project and kind
Yeah.
of experimental in a way. Like you mentioned before about the arcs, I loved the variety, right? Like, and that's what makes the arcs so great is because you can have each arc has its own identity and even its own subgenre. Like you're like, oh, we're gonna have this noir. We're gonna have like a little detective guy going around, or we're gonna have just a straight up World War II. Them landing in the desert, just fire everywhere. Like, oh, we're gonna have
Do an
mischief and
avant-garde
intrigue.
movie. We're gonna do an avant-garde movie, where like you said, it's a bunch of droids and a frogman running around a void. Like,
Yeah, like come on, like how would that ever even get made today? You know what I mean? Like exactly. That's what made it so great is because Lucasfilm didn't really was a private company, right?
yeah,
Yeah. So like he could do
and
whatever he wants. He doesn't have to worry about stockholders.
yeah, Lucasfilm could do what Lucas wanted to do, which you look back at George's story and him coming up in Hollywood and how the studios would always mess with his films in a way that he didn't like. He was a control freak. He wanted to make his movie his way, and kind of at the end he was able to do it. Lucasfilm was whatever George Lucas wanted it to be, and it made the projects that George Lucas wanted to make, and that was the Clone Wars, and that was to do just Star Wars versions of all these stories that George loved, and to push the animation forward while also telling really compelling character stories. And yeah, in a lot of ways it's kind of the, I don't know what the right term for it is, but it's kind of like the cherry on top of his career, where at the end he was finally able to do everything he ever wanted in a way.
I just want to know right now, like, what he thought of Filoni handling these final episodes. Like, I want to hear an interview
Yeah.
already. Like, oh, the George. Like, I want to see like his critiques. Like, yeah, this is what my ultimate vision was. Like, we haven't gotten anything of that. I find that kind of strange. Like, come on, somebody just get George Lucas on a mic or
Yeah.
something.
Get him to say something. Get him to tell it. Well, Dave has said in the past that he checks with George, and George will still sometimes he'll check with George about things, and he'll see what George thinks of stuff. So I'd like to think that eventually those two will get together for lunch, and George will tell him everything he has to tell, and then Dave will share that with us at a celebration. But it's funny, just how involved George can be. I have a sort of a funny story about this. At Star Wars Celebration 6, which was in 2012, we were leaving the con at the end of the day, and one of my friends I was with at the time said, "Hey, there's Dave Filoni over there," and he was just like over by a tree on his cell phone, and he's on his phone. So we jumped out of the car, we ran over, and we're like, "Well, let's go say hi to Dave." And so we can tell Dave's on the phone, so we're just hanging out, we're standing there, and I think Dave Filoni, he's the coolest dude at Celebration, especially at Celebration 6. He's probably like getting his reservation for dinner or getting directions to a party or something. Like, that's what I imagine Dave Filoni doing. But this phone conversation is going on a really long time.
Huh?
And I noticed that he's writing notes, like furiously writing
Really?
notes. And then like, I wasn't listening in on his conversation. I want to make that very clear. But when you're saying, you hear certain words, and we started to hear like filmmaking words, like
Oh.
check the edit for that, or we'll rewrite this, or tell Joel Aaron to work on that.
Oh.
And we realized, oh my God, he's probably on the phone with George.
Oh crap, man, that's awesome.
And he finally gets off the phone, and we were waiting for him, and he comes up and he says he realized we were waiting to say hi, and so he comes up and says hello. And one of my friends says to him, "Hey, was that George on the phone?" And he goes, me, I won't say. kind of plays coy. Then he wrote a blog post for StarWars.com
Really?
where he talked about this moment where he was at Celebration on his phone, talking to George, getting notes about new Clone Wars episodes, and there were a bunch of fans waiting to meet him. And there was a picture of him that his assistant had taken from that exact moment while we were
Oh,
standing just outside the frame of the picture
what?
while Dave was there writing his notes, and he said in the thing that, yeah, it was George who was on the phone with. So
Oh,
either he lied in the blog post and my friend gave him a better idea for who he was on the phone with than for a story about who he was on the phone with than who he was actually on the phone with, or we were one phone call away from George Lucas.
oh, it is such an awesome story. Just being in the background of all that happening. Like, it could have been
Yeah,
like the most important detail of the Clone Wars. Like,
yeah.
oh yeah, like what's gonna happen here? Oh
George
man.
might have been like, yeah, so that's when Darth Maul fights Ahsoka. Like, what? What? Yeah,
Oh man, this has been an
should have gotten
awesome.
him to call back and say, hey, do you want to talk to these guys?
Ah, jeez. Oh man, that was a lot of fun. I want to finish up with final thoughts, if you know, just your final thoughts on the Clone Wars in general right now, man.
Oh man, it's I'm still kind of in awe of the last season. You know, I it was something that I didn't think would happen for a very long time. Then they announced that it would happen, and it seemed so far away for so long. And then all of a sudden it was here, and we were in the thick of it. And then just like that, it was over again, and we're kind of back to a world where there isn't more Clone Wars. And you know, in one sense, it was so much fun to have the show back for this final season, that like I'm a little bit sad that it's not continuing, that there isn't going to be more, that we're not going to do this again next year for Clone Wars. But at the same time, I'm just really happy that we got to do it, that we got to watch this show again. We got to see new episodes, and talk about them all together on podcasts, on videos, on whatever, on Twitter, on everything, and just enjoy the show again, because the show means a lot to me. It was what got me back into Star Wars, and then got
Hmm.
me into Star Wars podcasting and everything. Um, I've met some great people through the show, and gotten into, and it's just been such a wonderful addition to Star Wars and to my life in a lot of ways, because I feel like I almost owe the Clone Wars something, because it's been so good to me, with great stories, and meeting people through our shared love of those stories. It's just been really, really special, and so I've really enjoyed this final season, and so I'm always going to look back on season 8 or season 7. If only we were looking back on season 8.
Oh man.
I'm always going to look back on season 7 as something that I'm just really happy about, and as a time that, even though the rest of the world was pretty crazy with coronavirus and everything, um, it was really this really nice thing to have, and it was a really fun time because we all got to talk about Clone Wars together. And so it is probably, it is definitely my favorite show of all time, and it's one of my favorite Star Wars things, and it's something that I hold very dear when it comes to Star Wars, because it just means that much. So season 7 was incredible, and I'm sorry there's not going to be more, but I'm really, really grateful for what we got.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Like everybody has their own in with Star Wars, right? Like
Yeah.
mine was a lot of the times in with I would say most of the time I think it was the video games that got me really hooked and kept me hooked. But yeah, then there's plenty of people with the Clone Wars out there, and yeah, now the Clone Wars hasn't been with me forever. Probably in the last 5 years is when I really got into it. But literally, like that's awesome how meaningful it is to you, and for it to jumpstart everything that you've had success with the Star Wars Underworld and all these awesome interactions you've had with people throughout the years with friends and meeting different people involved in the industry. That's huge, right? Like that's monumental stuff that is because of an animated series that was made in 2008 that started with this movie that not everybody was on board with right away. And like you said, like it grew. Like the Clone Wars grew over time, and it was because people like you, like the community was really rallying around this story that needed to be finished, right? Like we didn't even spend time really to talk about that the show was canceled at one point, and it was because of the outcry that it was brought back from the dead. Like the power is there with the fans with the Clone Wars, and it's there's no denying that it was there for many, many reasons, of which we've pretty much gone over to a great length tonight talking about, and there's plenty
Yeah.
more I could probably come up with off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
it just goes to show you that even for me, like I wasn't the huge biggest fan of the Clone Wars. Not saying I disliked it, but there's other things in Star Wars that I enjoyed more. But now that the series has finished, it has been finished completely. I now see the full picture, and with that, I can say it's probably up there with the movies, on par with the movies easily. Which for me is like the biggest praise you can give an animated series, to be on the same level as the
Mm.
feature films that people basically have built careers off of, and you're weighing something that high compared to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the same. It's up there with the films, especially after this season, and especially after having sort of lived through the communal aspect of it with this season in particular, and as well as the films, and you realize it's all Star Wars. It's all just about people loving the stuff and being passionate about it and wanting to talk about it, and there being great stories to feed that fandom. It's really something special, and yeah, it is absolutely up there with the films.
Yeah, Dominic, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on my channel for the first time, man. I've been involved with you guys a few times throughout the years on the podcast and
Yeah.
meeting you guys and at Celebration. And there's a reason why I brought you on this specific episode, because I could think of nobody else better to talk about the Clone Wars with. Mind
Going.
you, this episode was supposed to be like an hour shorter, and the conversation was just so good that I was like, we're going to keep on going with this
Oh,
because I
yeah.
am loving this conversation. And again, like, you are so passionate about this, and if you guys want to learn more about the Clone Wars and learn about it, well, it's not going to be on a weekly basis, but you can catch up with all the episodes that he's released with his buddy Kieran Duggan and the others years past on the Clone Wars Strikes Back podcast. Is there any other things you want to plug? You can go ahead and plug Star Wars Underworld, all that good stuff.
Yeah, if you want to find all the old episodes of The Clone Wars Strikes Back, the easiest way to do that is to go to tcwstrikesback.com. Well, it's TCW, like the Clone Wars Strikesback.com. We've got all the episodes up there from those very early ones in 2013, talking about the movie, all the way through this past season. And so if you want to go back and listen to those for some reason, I would recommend starting with the most recent season. They're all there. And you can also check out the weekly Star Wars Underworld podcast, where we talk about all things Star Wars news over on starwarsunderworld.com. All the old Clone Wars Strikes Back episodes are there too. And you can follow me on social media at DominicJ25 on Twitter and Instagram. My Instagram is a mixture of Star Wars and baking right now. So enjoy food and Star Wars
Oh, and
over there.
you also have a mascot. I think he's been on
Oh
hiatus
yes,
for a little bit.
yes, we do. We have Percy the Puffer Pig.
Yes,
There
he's
he is.
making an appearance on the Starrapter YouTube channel. Everybody, it's Percy the Puffer Pig.
That's Percy the Puffer Pig. Yeah,
Yes.
follow. You can follow this guy over at Percy the Puffer Pig on Instagram, and yeah, he posts periodically about Star Wars and just other adventures that he goes on. Um, when I remember to bring him with me, and then as I failed to do in at New York Comic Con, take him out and take pictures of him in places. carried around this toy all through New York Comic Con, thinking like, oh yeah, I'll get some great shots. We were at Starrapter and I were at the Force Friday in Times Square. I thought we could get Times Square shots. Boom, just fell out of my brain for some reason. I was so excited, I guess, for the new Star Wars toys or whatever.
Oh man, oh man. For
Yeah.
everybody that watched, go ahead, sound off in the comment section below. What was your some of your favorite moments of the Clone Wars? What makes the Clone Wars special to you guys? Let's talk about it down there in the comment section below. If you guys are new to the channel, welcome. I talk about Star Wars a heck of a lot, pretty much on a weekly basis. So if you guys want to learn more about Star Wars and other things, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It's the easiest way to support me. So for me, for Dominic, that's going to do it for us here on Starraptor. That was the Outer Rim Transmissions Episode 2. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you always.
It's a wrap.
There we go. Thanks for checking out the video. Please hit that thumbs up symbol. It helps me know that I'm making content that you guys enjoy. And if you enjoyed this video, I also include 2 videos down below you guys should check out. And please consider subscribing to this channel. It helps support me and it notifies you guys of when I get new videos up on the channel. You can also contact me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Starrapter.